Hey there, horror fans! Welcome to episode 82 of Funny Books Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. I am your host, James Ferguson. This week, Ben Grisanti returns. He was last on the show to talk about Polybius Dreams, his 80s horror comic with a haunted video game. This time around, Ben has a new creepy one-shot called Secret Santas that could very well become a new holiday tradition. Just not one you're going to share with your kids. Ben is currently running a Kickstarter campaign to fund the release of Secret Santas, and it is well worth checking out. You can find more about Ben's work at hypnoticdogcomics.com, and he can also be found on Twitter as @BenGrisanti. That is it for the intro this week, so here is episode 82 of Funny Books Splatter with my guest, Ben Grisanti. Yeah, so I read through Secret Santas. I actually wrote a review for it earlier today. So that's all ready to go. Well, it will be once my editor sends it back to me, but this is some creepy stuff, man. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's one of the darkest things I've written, I think. That's kind of how, I think that's kind of what we set out to do, is that we set out to do something, I set out to do something that was kind of ugly, and I think we absolutely nailed it. Like, we looked at, Lucas was on board for this, the artist on it, Lucas Kowalczyk, Polish guy, doing a bunch of indie books. He's got a lot of indie work out there.
Yeah, he did a book with Mike. He did a book with Mike Garley for the Samurai book, the Samurai Slasher.
Yes, he did. Yeah,
that was really cool.
He did a book with Michael Tanner too. Strike Team, codename Diamond Force, which was like an 80s B-movie action homage, which is very much up my alley as well. I thought that book came out pretty good. But I was reading a lot of Jack Davis. So I have my buddy of mine brought me this anthology of like EC Comics and Tales from the Crypt stories that were Jack Davis, and Jack Davis was kind of instrumental in Mad Magazine for many, many years. And I said, "Hey, Lucas, I've been reading all these Jack Davis stories. Here's this kind of EC Comics thing that's really dark." And he was on board. He liked it. We were originally we were working on something. I had seen his work, and it was like really gonzo, like really out there.
Yeah.
And I immediately started pitching him something that was also gonzo and out there, that was like this dimension hopping fantasy horror, put a bunch of monsters in it and stuff. It would have been really cool, but as soon as I just posted online that I thought it would be funny to do a story about an underground black market secret Santa ring. And he was like, he would much rather do that. He messaged me right away.
That's funny. So like it kind of came together in that case because of what you think is like a throwaway tweet, like one of those like ideas you're like, this isn't going to happen. This is just like, some silly thing just to toss out there, but like it's now you have a comic.
Yeah, those are some of like my favorite comics that I've seen over the last year, especially with the indie books and the guys that I'm friends with, were like pretty much started that way. Ask Aishay Han or Andrew Han about Gladiasaurs, where there was somebody posted online about the museum of creationism had like an exhibit of like giant gladiators fighting dinosaurs, and he turned that into a comic pretty quick. Wow. He got a writer on board for that.
I saw someone already has kickstarted and will be releasing a Space Force comic.
Yeah, I saw a couple of those
real soon.
There's like competing Space Force comics out there now. I mean,
what a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive indeed. And that's not that far off from like what Mad Magazine was doing. So now there's all these different people doing that kind of same like kind of cartoony stuff. Mad Magazine too, still, but yeah, that was a huge influence. For sure.
Yeah. So we kind of jump right into this, but why don't you explain to folks what Secret Santas is first? I mean, you kind of touched upon it with the underground Secret Santa ring, right. But like, how would you describe the book?
Well, that's pretty much the hook, like right there. Yeah. Like it's really all about that. It's all about, this is a story. This is a holiday story. It's a horror story. I want to set that expectation right away. About an underground black market secret Santa ring. And then it was just kind of taking it from that and figuring out how to realistically create that and like what kind of story that it would be. So it obviously takes place during the holiday season. Our main character is a guy named Jeff, and he's trying to get this new video game system for his new stepson that he wants to impress. And that is very much inspired by the Sega Genesis. It's like, I guess historically it's about the release of the Sega Genesis and the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System, like in the 80s, and it kind of is. So there's this hot item out there, and we're like, he doesn't have a lot of money, so how does he go about getting it? And the first thought that came to mind was, who's going to be running an underground Secret Santa thing? Well, it's going to be criminals. And I don't really want to give too much away, but it ends up going down kind of a Cold War route. Like, it's the 80s, and there's a good portion of it that is kind of a spy crime story. And
and it's funny, like, that's like gravy in terms of the story. Like, you get into like Jeff's story and like his plight and what he has to do to try to get this gaming system, and then like all of a sudden, you touch upon like this Cold War spy espionage kind of thing that's like it plays a part in the story, but it's almost like, that's extra. Like, if you did like you could almost do like a follow-up just on that element alone, but you're there for the Secret Santa thing.
Like, it's kind of out of left field, and it's kind of by design too. It's like you get that plot twist like a little, almost halfway through the book, like, and it's sort of like the reason for everything. But like, without going into it too much, I didn't really think that when I was writing this a year ago, I didn't really think that it would be super timely to have something that was about like Russia, United States geopolitics. But like, it's
funny how that worked.
It turned out it worked out, I guess, for us. But yeah, it just kind of like something short. That was the other thing, is we wanted to make sure this was a one shot. We're going to one and done. Very much inspired by, like I mentioned, EC Comics. And just this whole last year, I've just been reading a ton of like serialized horror anthology comics. Like, I've got all the creepy editions for like Bernie Wrightson, Deco, Richard Corbin, Alex Tote, like all of those like creepy volumes that Dark Horse puts out. I just got them all this last year, so I've been making my way through those. So I feel like I had like a pretty good idea of that sort of narrative quality that I wanted to put into it. And I think I tried to do this before, like with one of my older comics, because I've always been trying to homage EC any way that I can. And I think that it came out a lot better in Secret Santas, as far as like getting that kind of narration. The narrator's part of the story, which is one of the spy guys. May as well like reveal that right now. It's a short comic. It's hard to decide what I want to spoil and what I don't.
No. You're good. You're good. I think and that aspect to it, like, it's again, like, the narrator is part of the story, but he's not like, there I was walking alongside Jeff. Like, it's not in that regard. It is like your Uncle Creepy or the Crypt Keeper, where he's in there to kind of like guide the story, kind of just keep it on the rails and remind you every so often that he's there and that this is a scary place. So I think it's like just that right amount of balance there.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's totally what I was going for. And it took a while. It took a couple times to try to like get that kind of narration down. It's a tricky way to try to write. Like, it might not be the most intuitive. Like, for me, it's a lot more intuitive. Just from like a writing standpoint, it's so easy to just slip into the scripting for like screen, like film, like kind of mentality where you're imagining it that way, which is why it's good to work with people like Lucas that will just shatter all your expectations as far as that's concerned. He was great to work with. He came out with a lot of ideas. I left a lot of things in the story up to him entirely, as far as what were some of the other people at the Secret Santa meeting were doing. That was all him.
Oh my God, that was some of the creepiest part of the book. Like, it's like, of course, all right, it's an underground Secret Santa ring, and like, you're going there not because like, oh, I'm gonna order this shit on Amazon, like, or like, oh, I just want to like give to others. No, it's because these people want some shady shit.
Yeah, exactly.
And you get disgusting individuals. Like, the dude he sits next to, and like, oh, that guy. And like, the design of that guy is just so like, ugh. Like, I even put, when I wrote the review for it, I put in there like I'm cringing typing out what the description of this man right now, because like, just, and Lucas makes him like just so like, ugh. Like I'm thinking about it now, and like there's like a little like vomit in the back of my throat, just like thinking about how seedy and disgusting this dude is. Like, ugh. Everything about it. Ugh.
It's funny that like that's absolutely what we're going for. This is a horror comic for sure. And in many ways it was like, I like things that are just pitch black, as far as tone, like just dark as possible. And I've always felt that there's a lot of good Christmas horror, but a lot of it just wasn't dark enough for me. This is my challenge. Like, my challenge to that is definitely, like this book. And I feel like in a weird way, like there's definitely that cartoon grotesque that Lucas like seized on right away. Like in other ways, what's happening is sometimes very humorous, which like doesn't really undercut the tension of it, but gives it this kind of twisted aspect to it, where it's just kind of cartoony as well. You know, it's not full-on, it's not a realistic book whatsoever.
It's kind of like, do you remember in like the original Ren and Stimpy cartoons when like they would close up on something like really disgusting and it was like really hyper detailed?
Oil paintings?
Yeah, or when they pull out all their teeth and it's just like they pull out nerve endings and shit like that. It's that kind of like close up quality where you're like, I'm grossed out by this, but also laughing a little bit. So it bridges this kind of like fine line there.
I used to find, like, when I was younger, I used to find, like, underground comics and stuff that were like that. And I think now that I'm thinking about it, I don't see too much of that. Like, there's a lot of, like, incredibly talented people working in comics, and there's so much good stuff coming out there. But I don't see very many just straight up gross things. You know, I think there's something to be said for that. Yeah, like, there's some guys that are
it's
like
tough.
doing more like the underground comics kind of stuff out there.
It's a tough. I mean, it's tough. It's a tough market for something like that too. But I mean,
sure.
like they pop up every so often. Like I remember there was a Kickstarter campaign for, I want to say it was called Fight Frogs or something like that. I think it was like an Australian group that was making this book, and it was like the Ninja Turtles meets Ren and Stimpy kind of like ridiculousness.
Nice.
But it's that same level of kind of like gross out humor and art style that just like it spoke to me in such like a beautiful way. Yeah. I was like, this is brilliant and ridiculous and hyper violent, but we're just gonna go with it.
Yeah, for sure. It's threatening. Like there's something like wrong about it. You know, it's a little bad. Yeah. It's when comics can be like kind of bad.
Like I shouldn't be reading this.
Yeah, exactly. It's like what is this weird underground comic that I got here? Which was like a lot of some of the older people, like I showed it to the guy at the comic shop. He's seen everything, you know, for the last 40 years or so. And he was like, yeah, this looks like an old underground comic. I'm like, yep, that's totally
the vibe.
Totally the vibe. I'm very happy to do that. But yeah, it's definitely not for everybody for sure. Just like handing this out to just like random people being like, hey, you want a holiday comic book? It's like, no, not at all.
It's just like Home Alone, but just a little different.
Just a little different than Home Alone. Because people think I don't know. I set out to do something dark. This is pretty dark for what I'm capable of, I think. I'm sure I'll try to find a way to like one up myself. Well, not everything I write is this dark, so it's going to be interesting to see like this juxtaposed against some of the other things that I have like that I'm working on like right now.
Yeah, and I mean like there's I feel like the Venn diagram for like dark humor and horror is like practically one solid circle. Like when you have so the people that will be that your target audience for this book are definitely the horror fans out there too. So there's some nice overlap.
Yeah, and we're not explicitly marketing it like it's a horror book either, but it clearly is. And it's like it's soft horror. It's or like the horror thriller crime. I guess it's a crime book when it really comes right down to it, but it's definitely pretty grim.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty happy with it. It's got the moralistic vibe to it as well, which something that is shared with like a lot of holiday stories, you know. This is coming from somebody that generally does not like Christmas. Like my least favorite time of the year is Christmas. It's like, and my immediate family, just like my mom and my dad, like none of us really do anything for Christmas at all. So it's just like a time to hang out basically. But we are all very cynical when it comes to that. So, and again, I never really felt like there were some other like holiday horror things like, Silent Night, Deadly Night, like always stands out for having one of the funniest horror movie monologues that ever exists when the kid is visiting his grandfather and the parents walk away for a second and he tells them this horror story about Santa Claus. Check it out.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I have this like gap in my horror like education that comes in a lot of movies. Like I only just saw The Exorcist like 3 years ago, so it's like I have to catch up on all these things. But comics are easy for me to get in there and kind of read and catch up to a lot of stuff quickly. But I think that moral tale that you're talking about also plays into the whole old school EC Comics vibe, because a lot of them end up being morality tales. I mean, they're horrible, they're horrifying and just like filled with gore and stuff sometimes. But at the end of the day, it's trying to show a lesson that like this character went and did something wrong and was punished for it.
Right. Yeah. They always have it coming, like one way or another. Like it's something that they did to deserve it. And yeah, I don't know how well that actually translates, but I think like we got as close as we possibly can to it. Because it's definitely not clear good guys and bad guys, I think, in this. I think our main character, Jeff, is absolutely a victim, like throughout the whole thing. Like I feel bad for the guy, you know, but at the same time, also he's a cartoon character, so
so it's something that you can feel bad for him, but at the end of the day, like he crosses so many lines.
He crosses a pretty clear line, yeah, he does.
So what is it about the 80s that seems to have like captivated you? Because between this and like in your other book, is it Polybius? I always mispronounce it. Polybius Dreams, like you know, that's like a time period that's a sweet spot for you.
Yeah. No, everything else that I've written takes place in the past as well. Like, it's not just these two, but these two particularly. In a way, like, Secret Santas, I was really in Polybius Dreams mode, and I was thinking a lot about video games. And I was watching a lot of YouTube videos about video games and, like, reliving stuff and, like, looking for, like, obscure stuff that was around when I was a kid that I wasn't quite, like, aware of. Like, YouTube is great for that. And I was just looking at, like I mentioned earlier, like what that was like releasing the consoles at the time when the Genesis came out. And it was like, I was way too young at the time to really have any kind of knowledge of that. But like video game industry is very much a part of our news and, you know, and pop culture is such a huge thing now that's kind of like an early instance of this like second generation consoles like coming out, and just looking at the consumerism and that in combination with like the 80s and what that represented and all the like the movies and stuff that came out of there. It was everything that I was like reared on, like coming up. So it's really easy to revisit that. There's my graphic novel that I finished. The first thing I ever wrote is now a graphic novel called Insurance, about insurance claims adjusters for magical and haunted items. And that takes place in the 90s. There's another book that I'm writing right now for another artist friend of mine. We're fleshing it out right now. That takes place in the 90s. The other story that I wrote, two of the other things that I'm working on take place in the early 2000s. So it's just much easier for me to write in the past. These two came to, like, Polybius Dreams and Secret Santas do kind of have a common origin, and that I was working on. I was very much in that mindset about 80s video games when I was working on both of them, for sure.
Yeah, it's almost funny thinking that, like, you know, the kids from Polybius Dreams just like walking by Jeff on the street or something like that.
Oh yeah, no, or like I guess you know the video game from Polybius Dreams would definitely be coming out for the Turbo Drive system for sure. I guess I should mention the Turbo Drive system and what went into that. But we created this video game system for our main character to be obsessed with for the holidays, and we kind of took Turbo from Turbo Graphics, Drive from Mega Drive, which is what Genesis is known as in Europe, and System from Nintendo Entertainment System, and just kind of like mashed it together and created a mascot for it. The mascot, when you see him, he's like a radical like animal with like
he's like Banjo-Kazooie mixed with Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah, he's got like an 80s dude, you know, and that was initially in the script I had just called him the animal with attitude, and that just ended up being like a really good like branding, and that came through to the design. Lucas wanted to do an ad for the actual video game system that featured the character. It's on the inside front cover of the book when it comes out, but it's like an old video game ad, and it's got him in the middle of it, and it says, "Hey, I'm animal with attitude," and just kind of worked. Like it was the perfect kind of like generic thing for this mascot. And you'll see over the course of the book, it's like the mascot talks to him and he has nightmares about him at one point. So the mascot is kind of a character in the book as well.
Yeah, it plays in like a whole, like weird like fever dream kind of aspect to it, where it's like, you know, you could see the characters sweating, and I think that's like really comes out in Lucas's artwork, and then you almost just like feel like the comic sweating. You're just like, this is like a skeevy underbelly of a Christmas pastime.
Yeah, it's definitely got that vibe. It's all about the vibe. It's all about that thing going for it. It's like, I feel like if people really are sick of like holiday stuff, and they'll probably get a kick out of this book.
It's something that I
don't know if you're getting any kind of like sound troubles or whatever, but I might be getting a little bit of sound troubles.
Everything's coming through fine on my side right now. Yeah, just let me know though if anything doesn't come in clearly. But I mean, I'm recording on my end with two different programs, so usually between the two of them they're covered. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So I also see online you talk a lot about playing D&D and exploring and doing a lot of different games in that regard. Like, have you thought of or have you tried to get that aspect into comics?
Oh, the D&D, yeah. I mean, it's absolutely related. Like, it's funny. I'll be stressing out about like writing comic books, even though it's my hobby. It's supposed to be free time. But I'll be like stressing out about that, and then I'll find like some D&D stuff to work on like for a little bit, and it's just kind of like the perfect like mix that I can just kind of do one and then do the other, and it works out pretty well. As far as like my writing, I do have like a D&D comic that I would like to put together based on something that happened in the game. But just in general, being able to do both of those things like at once has been like really good for creativity overall. I love how popular D&D is right now. It's kind of mind blowing. Like, it's never been this popular. Like, and there's other things that we're trying. Like, I'm talking to people about maybe doing a game stream at one point.
Yeah, I mean, you could make that on Twitch or something like that, and just and that could help fund your comics. That's a possibility.
Right? Yeah, a lot of people are doing it on Twitch. Yep. There's all these great ways to be creative right now. Like with the internet and sort of like the structure and Twitch and how popular podcasting is, and even with comics, they're still going to be my first love. But I like doing these like kind of like weird underground comics, and I've been appreciating some of the small press and zine shows that I've been going to a little bit more than the bigger Comic Cons, and so just personally, as far as my writing goes, I'm probably going to try to concentrate more on like that kind of group, or those kind of shows, and like that kind of like. Group of comics, I guess.
That's also like the benefit with comics in general is that like there's something for everybody, so you can find that kind of niche, whatever it is, and if it's the indie kind of zine aspect of it, you could jump right into that. There's a place for that, there's an audience for that, there's a whole community based around that. Yeah,
there's an audience for everything that's out there, so I like it that I can do like a weird underground book and try to like get it out there and put it in front of people that like might be into it. I think there's a good amount of like the comic audience and the Kickstarter audience that's gonna like see exactly what we're doing, and go for it.
I think that resonates with all. And I mean, like especially what you see. I think Kickstarter is going to have something for everybody too. But there's a nice crowd there, and after a couple successful Kickstarters under your belt, like that's something that I think can help resonate. So people that were into your previous books can now dive into this too. I think you could probably caveat a little bit to say like, hey, this gets into some weirder stuff, but I'm sure there's still a lot of folks that'll follow you along that journey.
Yeah, I definitely don't want anybody picking up thinking this isn't a horror book.
Yeah, I love a Christmas story. It'll be. I'll read this to my kids. Like, do not read this to your kids. This is not a kid's book.
Does anybody really think that now? No, it's not. This is way weird. It's obviously a lot of fun being afforded the opportunity to put things out on Kickstarter and things like that. If we had maybe a little bit more time, we might do a longer run. So we're actually doing a pretty short run for the Kickstarter. It's going to be probably under 500 copies that we're printing, just because that's about what we estimate. We're not going to really need more than that between that and selling them like in person. And then we might, who knows, that'll be that for this book. And we might probably for the next year, depending on what we have available, like for printing and what the demand is like and what kind of shows we're doing, we might bring it back for next year. But it's nice. It's funny, like planning something that has that kind of like holiday release schedule like along with it. Although, they trudge out all the same Christmas stories and stuff every year. Like I could just do this and have this on my convention tables like seasonally. Might be a fun way to do it.
And not for nothing, but like you have this as a, that could be something that comes in. It's like a new Christmas tradition. All right, yeah, you can watch Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or It's a Wonderful Life, but have you tried Secret Santas? Like, give that a whirl as your new Christmas tradition.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that we were kind of thinking about was the story is our narrator for the story is like a CIA guy, like he's an intelligence guy, and because he's kind of like the mascot character that's telling the story, and it's in that easy comic style, we could definitely do more with him later on. But Lucas and I both have like a bunch of other stuff that we want to get to. Other things that like. Just there being like a whole lot of like creative energy and a lot of people like I'm playing so much D&D right now that it's like 2 days a week that I'm doing that, and everybody that goes to the show has some other kind of thing that they're doing. Like we're working with a bunch of poets at first, so there were people that were running their own like poetry like chapbook publisher, and a couple of the other guys are streaming and podcasting, and one of the dudes is painting, getting really into that, and we're all just kind of like super online about getting stuff posted and getting things out there. And just everything seems to be happening at once. And I'm sure there's a lot of friend groups that are like this right now. Like it's just really interesting to me.
It sounds like you have this like awesome like collective of creative energy that's just like all around you. That's got to be an exhilarating feeling, because like you're all just going to be feeding off of one another as you create stuff. Yeah,
it feels pretty good, Certainly, yeah, definitely have a good friend group, definitely have a good base, definitely made friends through creative endeavors that keeps this whole operation going. Moved into like my 5th year of actually just trying to make comics, and they're always like, all my ideas are really kind of like super culty. They're definitely have like a cult appeal to them. And I'm pretty happy with that. Like I'm really happy with like everything that I've written and stuff. It's hard to say like what I want to talk about right now as far as other projects that I'm working on, but there's one of them is like a UFO comedy that is, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the ones that's set in the 90s that really wants to capitalize on that kind of X-Files boom that happened in like paranormal research and like UFO stuff and like conspiracy, things like that. And that's like a stoner comedy. I'm really happy with that. Got some really funny jokes on that one. There's another one that I'm doing that is more like, there's 2 projects that I'm doing that are like sci-fi fantasy with a higher level of world building. That is like, those projects like that, they move very slowly because you spend so much time just fleshing ideas out. And one of them is an original idea that I came up with that I brought to the artist, and the other one is me writing the artist's idea. I don't want to speak to it too much, but a couple of these things were just like people that I just started talking with like online, and I just started like writing their ideas, and now we're kind of like off to the races. We've been working on it for several months at this point. So it's going pretty well. It's really a lot of fun. But as far as like my own like personal like comic book production, I'm probably going to focus more on doing these like single issues, like these kind of things. Like I think my main project for next year that's not like a major collaboration is going to be just doing short fantasy stories based on some of the D&D stuff that's been happening, or just ideas that I wasn't able to fully explore in the D&D game.
Well, yeah, that's just like a mining ground for stories that you could just kind of turn out, because like you even test run them in the D&D game, and then you're able to turn around and really flesh those out to make a more full-fledged story. If you could adjust the ending too, if it's like, oh, this didn't go the way I'd hoped, here's a new way to do it, and you can kind of take it any way that way.
Just like turn up the dramatic tension, edit out, use only the main ideas that you really need to do. Just those kind of like good writing techniques. Like don't bury the lead, get to your point really quick. Make sure the reader knows like is up on like everything that's happened. Don't give them a lot of extraneous stuff. I think that's the main problem, is that especially when you're translating like fantasy has a way of being like incredibly descriptive, because you're selling the world, that it's in. Like you're trying to paint this like really detailed picture, like everything that happens. But if you're going to narrativize it for something else like a comic book or a story or whatever, you really want to strip all that down as a writer to your main points, and really just like pull as much dramatic tension out of it as you can in as short amount of time as possible, which is comic book writing for sure.
I'm sure that helps you from a writing standpoint too, because like you get this like extra practice to telling for storytelling and trying to make sure you get it right, and you have this kind of instant focus group with the people that are playing the game to get an understanding. All right, is this working? Is this not? How can we improve upon this? And then that can in turn translate to better script writing for your comics work.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely helps. I was telling one of my players, I was giving him a ride home from the game the other day, and I was like, dude, listen, I don't ever stop writing. Like, I sit there, like, I work a desk job, and every, like, spare moment that I have is, like, some idea for a story, like, might pop up in my head. And then when I do have, like, time, I finally have the time over the course of the day where I can, like, work on some actual comic book writing and I can get words on paper. But then I go to the gym and I'm on some kind of, a gym equipment, like elliptical or something like that, and having more ideas. And then when I need to take a break from that, I work on my D&D stuff. So it's just, find a way to like slingshot from like one creative thing to the next creative thing. It's a lot of fun. I recommend it to everybody, especially if you got to work a boring job, which I know most of us do.
Unfortunately. Yeah. I could see that. Now, wait, from a schedule standpoint, like, are you just kind of like, are you able to just kind of like jot something, like, you get an idea in your head, you like jot something down real quick, and then when you find the time to be able to sit down and type it out long form or write it out long form, you're able to just kind of like a lunch comes around, you're like, okay, now I have a few minutes to actually flesh this out a little bit more?
Once in a while, I'll do it that way for sure. Most of the time, I can just kind of keep it in my head and just kind of like make a mental note of where a particular idea fits as far as the things that I'm working on. But yeah, I've done not very many like comic book projects, but everybody has pretty much the capacity to like think this way and like be creative. So I just always, I think it's probably a good idea to do whatever works. Like if it works for you to like keep a notebook, just keep like a small notebook with you at work and jot things down, then absolutely do that. What other I have a question for you. What horror books? Like I do notice like the tweets that come out, and you've done like a lot of reviews. But I was wondering what some of your favorite horror books were from this year. Oh my
god. This is
because I have one in particular that I like that I wanted to talk about.
Right now, it's funny because like I every week, like I can't go a week without reviewing a book by Donny Cates or Cullen Bunn. Like, but between the two of them, they're just like absolutely killing it on just about everything that they touch. But I think right now, like, Baby Teeth gets me every friggin' week or every month rather. I mean, you can't go wrong. Like, Harrow County wrapped up earlier this year. That was fucking terrifying. Like, it's funny. Like, I'm pulling up my little like cheat sheet for like, so throughout the year I write down like, all right, these are the books I need to consider for like my top 10 kind of things. But there's a lot out there. Like Gideon Falls is really good. The one with Jeff Lemire's like allegedly first horror comic. But then, like, I see things like Morte by Kevin Joseph and D.A. Bishop that was, like, this one-shot that kind of came out of nowhere and hit me like a ton of bricks that was just like, oof. Oh, my God.
I think I saw that. I haven't got a chance to get to that yet. I've been so, like, entrenched, like...
But I try to, it's funny, like I try to sample just about everything, and I make a list every week, and it's like I try to go through, like, all right, these are all the horror comics that come out, and I just try my best to get through as many as I possibly can and check off as many, but then inevitably I'll get to a point, like usually on Monday or Tuesday, where it's like, well, I'm not going to get to these books. I have to get ready for next Wednesday. So this is just the never-ending struggle. And I know it sounds like it's such a stupid thing to complain about. I'm like, I have too many comics to read. This sucks. But that's the thing. Like, I want to try to like touch upon stuff because there's so many like good genre stuff out there right now. So to try to like this week, for example, we're talking is I think a fifth Wednesday in the month. So that tends to be a lighter month. So I'm like, okay, cool. Now I can catch on to some of the indie titles, because unfortunately the indie stuff that people email me tends to, unless it's tied to like a specific Kickstarter where it's like, hey, I'm running this right now, it tends to get kind of like pushed to the back burner because I have deadlines for everything else. So I'm trying to keep up with everything. So it's tough. But I try to like fit in at least a couple a week to catch up. But there's a lot out there, man. But what are you?
I'm looking forward and catching up on everything that happened like this year as far as like horror comics, because I've been reading all these old like creepy volumes.
But
and
that's
like
also
stuff
good
like
for
that.
historical reference.
And I haven't like my.
I was just saying that's also good for historical reference.
Oh, for sure.
And that influences stuff that you're not even going to realize. Like there's so many of those old like those EC comics led to so much influence in today's creators that is still coming out today, and like they'll see something and like you could see where it's like, oh, I read this one story and now like I like this idea but I wanted to kind of expand upon it, or even just like classic stuff like Frankenstein and Dracula and stuff. They're still making comics today that are spinning out of those classic literature stories and just kind of continuing it. Those are things that are in public domain, and it's like, well, this was a cool starting point, but where can we go next? So what was it that you were reading or that you wanted to suggest?
Oh, the one that like really just kind of struck me that I actually had a chance to get to. There were a couple ones. Like I really liked Destroyer, which is more of like a sci-fi, the Boom Studios. But the one that like I really that struck me was the Unsound.
God. That was my number one horror comic last year. Number one. That book was so creepy.
I think I just read it this year, but that blew me away. And the other one that I really like is Sync.
Oh yeah, John Lee's and Alex Cormack.
John Lee's
that book is creepy and
good stuff.
Yeah,
good stuff. Really striking. Like first, like I don't know if we had a chance to talk about that before or not, but Unsound was like the one that like I got to. I just thought it was like so beautiful. Like just the artwork and like the way that it was done and the whole setting and the story that was just the way everything unfolded and the ending, the way it just kind of leaves you with that really uncertain ending. It was great.
When I knew that book was something special was when they had that guy with like the paper plate mask, and he turns the mask and his features turn with it, and you're like, but he just moved the eye holes down and the mouth hole up, and now his face is upside. Like, this is not right. Like, you know, like that kind of stuff freaks me out, and it's just like, it's like the best kind. That's my favorite kind of horror. That kind of like unsettling stuff where you're like, this is not natural. If I saw something in that in the real world, like I would just turn away and run the fuck away. Like I would just be out the door. But like seeing that, I'm like, I have to see where this goes now because like that is really, really creepy.
Yeah, that book really went in directions I was not expecting at all. That really, it's completely kept on my toes like the whole time. It's like, very impressed with that. I thought it was just incredibly good artwork, just form and function. Just loved it. That was like the last most like a recent book. Like I'm still digesting some things, but it's hard to keep up on everything. I'm trying to stay current on Monstrous and Failing because I just keep want to go back, but I keep recommending that to people. The other book that I think just wrapped up, I'm very excited about, is Extremity by Daniel Warren Johnson.
Did you see what he's coming out with next?
Fantastic.
Great. I forgot what it's called now. It's some Murder Chicken or something like that. It's some ridiculous name. Murder something. But murder, I'm like, this is incredible because that dude's artwork is nuts. It's like next level stuff.
Did you
ever read Ghost Fleet? It was a book that Daniel Warren Johnson Ghost Fleet.
I never did.
Daniel Warren Johnson drew it. Donnie Cates and Elliot Rahal wrote it, and it's this like bonkers story about like the truckers that move supernatural artifacts, like the warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like these truckers are the folks that get that stuff there, and it turns into this like weird apocalypse story about the end of the world, and like Johnson's artwork is like fucking nuts. Like that was like the first like exposure to like all three of those guys, and it was like, this is nuts. This is like absolutely insane. Like why aren't more people eating this up? And I think they just released like Image collected the whole thing, I think. So there's like a whole collection of them now. But because for a while, like Dark Horse regulated it to like a digital only title, and like it didn't look like it was getting anywhere. But oh man,
really?
Like, now you look back on it and you're like, you know, you have three of these creators that are like tearing up the business right now, and like you didn't know what you had almost.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good tip. I definitely had to check that out.
It's amazing. Like this is such like a great time for comics in general, but like for horror comics in particular, there's a lot to choose from, and I mean it definitely keeps me busy, and it's a good time to be writing about comics and being in this world. But then you get,
I think like horror is so like mainstream. Like horror is just huge. Pretty much, I mean, right up there with any other like thing that people are geeky about, I guess. But like, horror comics have always been like, people are always so concerned about what's happening like with the superhero books, but I'm always here for the horror comics for sure. So it's always my favorite stuff.
It's funny like how quickly some of that stuff can kind of like come and go. So like you get like a mini series or something like that, and then you'll dive into it for a little bit, and then like, all right, that mini series is over, but like in a couple of years, like I'm gonna like find that like some lost token and be like, oh my god, I remember this story. This was great. I need to reread this now because this is some insane horror comic. So like that's what I've been trying to do now as well, is just make time to go back and look at books that came out even just like 5 years ago, that just with how quickly things turn over, that's something that like should be bubbled up more and like remembered. We can't just like forget about these I'm lamenting about like the horror comics of yesteryear, right. And it's like that was like 5 years ago.
Yeah. Right, and well, everything moves so fast. It's like comics. People who don't read comics don't understand how quick things move. And it's funny because a lot of times when you're on the other side of it and you're like making comics, it feels like a month between issues like feels like forever. And being able to put out an issue a month is just like, at the level that I'm at is just like, holy cow, how do people do this? The answer is they don't really, but it's like things move so quickly. There's so much new material. I understand why it's like a lot of people have a hard time getting into it, because it's like, honestly, there's just so much there. It's so hard to find like a jumping out point. But then like, the argument there is like, well, there's so much TV too, but like people find time to watch TV, and it's like, right. It's quicker to read a comic than it is to watch, 44-minute long episode of a TV show. So, like, it's not like, there's right. something for everyone. You don't have to watch every single TV show that's out there, but you'll find something that you're into, and the same thing can be said about comics. Oh yeah, I always say the same. I say the same exact thing to everybody. It's just like, always just find something that you think you're gonna like. Just go for it. Just pick it up, read
the hell out of it, and that's it.
Yeah. So I get people, like a lot of people, like I'm the only one that they know that makes comics, and so I end up when you're that ambassador, you're like, I'm this ambassador for this entire medium for some people. Yeah, and like, what do you recommend? It's find it easier to recommend stuff for people's kids. Well, just feel like this will be the cool thing. Get them.
But it's also just like so funny that like you don't have that for like any other medium. Like you're not gonna have like, hey man, I really want to get into movies. What movies should I watch?
Exactly. Nobody's had
like that kind of conversation doesn't happen, but like for some reason comics, it has that kind of like weird stigma attached to it. They're like, I don't even know where to start. Whoa, I gotta read, and there's pictures. Like, tone it down a notch here. Let me make sure I understand this. Is there like a guide or something that can help me get there?
How do they work?
But I feel like it's not that hard. But yeah, I don't know. I that's one of the problems the industry faces. I mean, there's a bunch of other things that go on, but like, just that idea that like,
people like us have been reading comics so long, we take it completely for granted. Like comic book readers, we just look at them like completely second nature. And some people have a hard time with it. It's if you never really thought. I've never really thought about it.
Some people will struggle with how to even read the book. So knowing that that's out there, it's like, all right, well, like how do I explain how to read the comic? Like, all right, well, you follow this, you do this, but yeah, you're right, second nature to us. I don't know. Well, that's not a problem we're gonna solve tonight, unfortunately. So, shifting gears back to Secret Santas, though, is there do you have anything else planned for the Kickstarter aside from the basics like the book itself?
As far as the Kickstarter, it's like we're mostly like expecting just gonna put the book up there. It's gonna have like a relatively low goal. It's like basically there's gonna be the 5% Kickstarter takes, and then half of it's gonna go to printing, the other half of it's gonna go to shipping, and we got it like figured out kind of like exactly where we're gonna need it. And I think we have a goal that we're gonna be able to hit. It's gonna be pretty modest. It's gonna be like a 2,500 probably, and we're really only offering the book, but we're offering it for Christmas. And I am going to do like kind of a special edition of it with some extras and some of the production artwork. There's a lot of really good production artwork from this comic, like for all the like the sketches and the stuff that Lucas did like ahead of time when we were figuring out who the characters were and how the book was going to go, and just to talk a little bit about it. So I'm going to do a special edition of the book that I can deliver gift wrapped for the holidays. So we'll do like a run of those. But other than that, I just kind of want to put it up there. And, see if I can find the audience, see if I can find the people out there that, definitely want something, a gross comic like this for Christmas. I think they're out there somewhere.
They are our people. They'll definitely be there. But on the subject of Polybius Dreams, what's next with that? So 2 issues are out. When can we expect more from that world?
Yeah, we're halfway. We're halfway. We got some other production things to work on, and then we're going to be revisiting it again. It's all about making sure that, seeing what other things are happening. Like, I got some other things, and I guess I have a publishing schedule now. But I totally do have a publishing schedule of like things that are coming out. So we're going to be revisiting Polybius Dreams again next year, figuring out when we can try to raise the rest of the money for it. We've had a lot of really great feedback on that, but I do super culty books. I do cult books, so it's like a smaller, passionate audience for it. And we definitely want people that are going to be like more like graphic novel readers. And we're moving on to the second half of that. And I don't know. I'm going to start rambling if I keep going. But yeah, the answer is like next year we're going to start looking at that. Yeah, I mean, like again.
That's what you're slowly building your own little comics empire here between all these different works. And if it's a cult thing, I guess
that's what I got to do.
That's it. If it's a cult thing with a weird audience,
perfect. I love self-publishing.
Go for it. You figured something out.
Yeah, I love self-publishing. I love doing it all myself. It's I like that there are other people out there and other like small press. I do like network a little bit, but I'm perfectly happy to just keep putting my own comic books out on a small scale, just as long as it finds the right people. That's really mostly what I'm interested in. I can sell it forever after this. But yeah, I really appreciate having me on to talk about my crazy books.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you liked it.
Where are the best places aside from hypnoticdogcomics.com? Any other places that people can go to find you online?
Yeah, Ben Grisanti. At Ben Grisanti on Twitter, BenGrisanti. Pretty easy to find. Earl Gratz on Instagram, EarlGratz. And definitely post a lot of comic book updates to Instagram. So that's kind of what I prefer for comic stuff lately.
Yeah, Ben, I'm glad that we had a chance to connect again. It's funny because like I'm being able to speak to a lot of creators lately that were like early guests on the show. And they were like just starting out or just like, getting a first issue out or something like that. And now I'm touching base with them after they have like a number of books under their belt, like a year later. And, that's definitely the case with you. So it's cool to see that kind of like a journey, go through, from, Overall Comics.
Good. Well, I'm happy to be part of it. This is a good show.
Cool. Thank you. So yeah, that wraps it up then for this episode of Funny Book Splatter. I have been James Ferguson with my guest, Ben Grisanti. You've been listening to Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. We've been bringing you the best in horror since 2002. In addition to comics, we cover movies, TV shows, books, and video games. We've got news, reviews, guest features, interviews, unboxing videos, and much more. Be sure to sign up to Steve's Deals newsletter to increase your horror collection without breaking the bank. Check us out at HorrorTalk.com and at HorrorTalk on Twitter.